The first freeze of November had come early to the Ozarks, and Marcus Webb felt it in the shrapnel behind his knee before he felt it anywhere else. He sat on an overturned milk crate outside his tent, watching his breath curl toward a sky the color of old pewter. The woods around Riddler Springs had gone quiet the way they did before real cold settled in. No bird song, no rustling, just the occasional crack of a branch finding its breaking point. His coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but he drank it anyway. Waste not. The rumble reached him before the sight did, a low mechanical growl winding up the old logging road, growing louder until a black and chrome Heritage Softail crested the ridge and stopped 30 yards from his camp. The rider killed the engine but didn't dismount right away, just sat there, scanning the tree line, the scattered tents, the fire pit ringed with stones Marcus had hauled up from the creek. Marcus didn't move from his crate. He'd learned that stillness was a language out here. It said, "I'm not a threat, and I'm not afraid," in the same breath. The rider finally swung off the bike. A big man, 60-ish, with a gray beard trimmed close and a leather cut that had seen decades of road wear. The patches told a story Marcus could read from 20 feet. Vietnam vet, road captain, Ozark Iron Brotherhood. The man walked like his hips hurt him, but he walked steady. "You Marcus Webb?" "Depends who's asking." "Dale Morrow. People call me Ironside." He stopped at the edge of the camp, respecting the invisible line. "You're the one who turned in a jacket to the gas station on Route 14. Had my club's patch on it." Marcus remembered. 3 days ago, he'd found the jacket crumpled in a ditch while walking the shoulder for cans. Good leather, worth something at a pawn shop. But he'd seen the patch on the back, a memorial patch stitched with care, with a name and dates that meant someone had loved and lost. He'd walked 2 miles to the Sinclair station and left it with the clerk. "Wasn't mine to keep," Marcus said. Ironside studied him for a long moment. "That jacket belonged to my son. He died 2 years ago. I left it on my bike like a damn fool while I was inside paying for gas, and it was gone when I came out. Thought I'd never see it again." Marcus looked at the man's hands. They were clenched at his sides, not in anger, but in the way a person holds themselves together when they're close to coming apart. "I'm sorry about your boy." "Yeah." Ironside's voice caught just barely. "Yeah, me too." He reached into his cut and pulled out a folded envelope. "I want to pay you for—" "No. It's just, I said no." Marcus stood, his knee protesting, and set his cold coffee on the crate. "I didn't do it for money. I did it because it wasn't mine. That's all." Ironside didn't push. He tucked the envelope away and looked around the camp instead. The 2 other tents, the clothesline strung between pines, the stack of firewood that wouldn't last the week. His eyes stopped on the small American flag Marcus had zip-tied to a branch near his tent. "How long you been out here?" "Long enough." "VA won't help?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "VA helps plenty of people. I'm fine." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Ironside just nodded slowly, like he understood the shape of the lie, even if he didn't know its particulars. "You serve?" "Desert Storm, 2 tours. I was in country in 71, Mekong Delta." Ironside pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, offered one. Marcus shook his head. "You know they're planning to clear this land? Whole camp, everyone out by the 15th. Marcus knew. He'd seen the notices stapled to trees last week, the county seal at the top, the legal language that meant you don't matter, dressed up in words like public safety and zoning compliance. "I know. You got somewhere to go? I'll figure it out." Ironside lit his cigarette and squinted through the smoke. "You know what this land was supposed to be? Before the county sold it off?" Marcus did know. That was the thing. He knew more than he should, more than was safe to know. He'd found the surveyor's map in a dumpster behind the county building 3 weeks ago, along with a stack of memos that told a story nobody was supposed to read. Parcels earmarked for a veterans' transitional housing project, quietly rerouted to a developer named Bridgewater Holdings, a councilman's signature on every page. "I know what it was supposed to be," Marcus said carefully. Something shifted in Ironside's expression. "Yeah? What do you know exactly?" Marcus looked at the man for a long time. The memorial patch, the grief still raw in his eyes, the way he'd come all this way for a jacket that wasn't worth $50 but was worth everything. "You really want to know?" "I drove 40 miles to thank a man for returning a dead boy's jacket. I got time." Marcus limped to his tent and pulled back the flap. Inside, wedged between his sleeping bag and a copy of For Whom the Bell Tolls he'd read 11 times, was a manila folder. He'd made copies at the library, 3 sets, though he hadn't known why at the time. Habit, maybe. The habit of a soldier who'd learned that redundancy kept you alive. He handed 1 set to Ironside. The biker read in silence. His cigarette burned down to the filter, forgotten. When he finished, he looked up, and his eyes had gone cold, in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. "You show this to anyone else?" "Mailed a copy to my daughter in Little Rock. Haven't talked to her in 2 years, but she's the only person I trust to keep it safe." The admission cost him something. His daughter, Rachel, who'd begged him to come live with her after Ellen died, who'd stopped calling after he'd said, "I don't need charity, not even from family 1 too many times." "You're sitting on a bomb, brother." "I know. And you're living in a tent on the land they're trying to steal." "I know that, too." Ironside folded the papers carefully and tucked them inside his cut. "What were you planning to do with this?" Marcus had asked himself that question every night for 3 weeks. The answer was always the same: nothing. What could a homeless man do against a councilman and a developer? Who would believe him? Who would care? "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't know who to trust." Ironside extended his hand. "You just found out." Marcus looked at the hand, scarred and calloused, offered without pity or obligation, just offered. He shook it. "Council meeting's in 3 days," Ironside said. "That's when they vote on the final sale. We're going to need more than paper to stop it. We're going to need bodies, witnesses, noise." He started toward his bike, then turned back. "You got a phone?" "Had to let it go." Ironside pulled a prepaid cell from his saddlebag and tossed it. Marcus caught it one-handed. "I'll be in touch. Don't go anywhere." "Where would I go?" Ironside swung onto the Heritage and kicked it to life. Over the rumble, he called back, "You did a good thing, returning that jacket. Most people wouldn't have. That's why I'm going to do a good thing back." He pulled on his helmet. "That's how we do it. Not because we have to. Because we remember what it cost to forget." The bike disappeared down the logging road, the sound fading until the woods were silent again. Marcus stood there for a long time, holding the phone, feeling the weight of what he'd just set in motion. In his tent was a photograph of Ellen, tucked into the same book she'd given him for their 20th anniversary. He could almost hear her voice. "You and your pride, Mark. One of these days it's going to cost you more than you can pay." Maybe it already had, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to pay it back. Councilman Ray Puckett sat in his car outside Shady Pines Memory Care, engine running, heat blasting against the November chill. He was already 15 minutes late for his Sunday visit, but he couldn't make himself open the door. The facility cost $4,000 a month. His father had been there for 2 years now, and the Korean War veteran who'd once rebuilt a carburetor, blindfolded, no longer recognized his own son. Most Sundays, Ray sat in a chair by the window and talked about nothing: the weather, the Chiefs, whatever lie he could spin about how well the business was going, while his father stared at the bird feeder outside and called him Jimmy or Sir or nothing at all. Ray's phone buzzed. A text from Vern Bridgewater. "Council vote Thursday. Everything still on track?" He typed back, "Handled." It wasn't handled. Nothing was handled. The development deal that was supposed to dig him out of debt had turned into a hole he kept shoveling deeper. The land sale needed to go through. If it didn't, Bridgewater would call in the loans Ray had personally guaranteed, and everything, the house, the cars, his father's care, would collapse like a tent in a thunderstorm. He thought about the homeless camp on that land. Veterans, some of them, men who'd served, same as his father. Ray told himself they'd find somewhere else. They always did. He told himself the transitional housing project was never going to get funded anyway, that he was just being realistic about how the world worked. He told himself a lot of things. Inside, his father was having a good day. He looked up when Ray walked in and said, "Raymond, you're late." Ray almost wept. Instead, he sat down and lied for an hour about a life that was falling apart. The next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of engines, plural this time, and the crunch of tires on the frost-hardened ground. He pulled on his boots and stepped out of the tent to find Ironside leaning against his Heritage, flanked by 2 other riders. One was a woman in her 40s with sergeant-at-arms patches and a no-nonsense expression. The other was younger, maybe 30, with the hungry look of someone still proving himself. "Marcus Webb," Ironside said. "Meet Dina and Coyote. They're going to help us figure this thing out." Dina stepped forward and shook Marcus's hand with a grip that meant business. "Ironside showed us the papers. You know what you found?" "I know what it looks like." "It looks like fraud. County land earmarked for veteran housing, sold to a private developer at below market value. Councilman Puckett's signature on the transfer authorization." She pulled a tablet from her saddlebag. "I spent last night doing some digging. Bridgewater Holdings is a shell company. Registered 6 months ago, no assets, no employees, just a P.O. box in Springfield, and Puckett's brother-in-law listed as the registered agent." Marcus absorbed this. So Puckett's not just facilitating, he's profiting. "Looks that way. Problem is, your documents are copies. A good lawyer could argue they're fabricated. We need originals, or we need someone on the inside willing to talk." "There's nobody on the inside who'd—" "Actually," Coyote interrupted, "there might be." He held up his phone. "My cousin Linda works in the county clerk's office. She's been complaining for months about weird stuff with the land records. Wouldn't go into detail, but she's been keeping her own files. Backup copies, date-stamped. She's scared to come forward, but she's also pissed." Ironside nodded slowly. "Can you get her to talk to us?" "I can try. She trusts me." "Mostly." Marcus watched this unfold with a growing discomfort he couldn't name. These people were organizing, strategizing, building a plan around evidence he'd found, and he was standing here like a bystander in his own story. "I should be the one to go to the council meeting," he said. "I found the documents. I can testify." Dina exchanged a look with Ironside. "You sure about that? Standing up in front of the whole town, cameras probably, telling everyone you're homeless and you've been living on county land?" The words landed like a punch. Marcus had spent 2 years avoiding exactly that. The pity, the judgment, the loss of whatever dignity he had left. Ellen's voice again, in his memory. "Pride's a warm coat, Mark, but you can't eat it." "I'll do what needs doing," he said, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. That afternoon, Marcus walked the 3 miles into Riddler Springs. He told himself he needed supplies, but really he needed to think away from the camp, away from the bikers and their plans, away from the feeling that his life was being swept up in a current he couldn't control. The town was quiet. A few pickup trucks angled in front of the diner. The hardware store had a Veterans Day sale sign in the window, 10% off for anyone with a DD-214. Marcus had a DD-214 somewhere, folded into the manila folder, with his discharge papers and his marriage certificate, and the deed to a house that wasn't his anymore. He stopped outside the county building. Through the glass doors, he could see the clerk's office, and behind the counter, a woman with graying hair and tired eyes, stamping documents with mechanical precision. Before he could talk himself out of it, Marcus pushed through the doors and walked up to the counter. "Help you?" the woman asked without looking up. "I'm looking for information about a land transfer. Parcel 2247, sold to Bridgewater Holdings earlier this year." Now she looked up. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. The nameplate on her desk read, "Linda Castro." "That's public record," she said carefully, "but you'd need to file a formal request. Takes 3 to 5 business days." "I don't have 3 to 5 days. The council votes Thursday." Linda's expression flickered. Recognition, maybe, or fear. She glanced toward the back office, where a door stood half open. "I can't help you," she said, louder than necessary. "You'll have to file the request like everyone else." She slid a form across the counter. Beneath it, almost hidden, was a sticky note with a phone number and 2 words, "Call tonight." Marcus palmed the note and walked out without looking back. That evening, he called the number from the prepaid phone Ironside had given him. "You're the one living in the camp," Linda said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "I've seen you walking the roads, picking up cans." A pause. "My brother did 2 tours in Iraq. Came back wrong. Couldn't hold a job, couldn't keep an apartment. He's in a facility now, up in Columbia. State-funded, barely adequate." Her voice hardened. "That land was supposed to help people like him, people like you, and they sold it out from under you for profit." "Can you prove it?" "I've got 18 months of documentation. Every irregularity, every backdated form, every signature that showed up after the fact. I've been too scared to do anything with it." She took a breath. "But I'm tired of being scared." "The council meeting's Thursday." "I know, I'll be there, but I need to know I'm not standing alone." Marcus thought about Ironside and Dina and Coyote, about the phone calls that had been going out all day, the network of writers being activated across 3 states. "You won't be alone," he said. "I promise you that." He hung up and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the wind move through the pines. Tomorrow, Ironside would arrive with more writers. The day after, more still. By Thursday, the parking lot of the county building would be full of chrome and leather, and the kind of witnesses that couldn't be ignored. But tonight, Marcus pulled out the photograph of Ellen and held it until his hands stopped shaking. "I'm scared too," he told her, "but I think I have to do this." She smiled up at him from the photograph, frozen in a summer 10 years gone, and offered no answers. She never had. What she'd offered was better, the belief that he was capable of more than he thought. His phone buzzed, a text from Ironside. "Words going out. Riders coming from KC, Springfield, Tulsa. VFW Post in Branson is opening their lot for staging. You ready?" Marcus typed back, "No, but I'll be there." 3 dots appeared, then a response. "That's all any of us ever are, brother. See you tomorrow." Across town, in a house he could barely afford to heat, Ray Puckett stared at his computer screen and the email he'd just received. Someone had been asking questions at the clerk's office. A homeless man. The same homeless man living on the land that needed to be cleared before Thursday's vote. Ray picked up his phone and dialed the sheriff's personal number. "Frank, it's Ray. I need a favor. There's a trespasser situation I need handled quietly, before Thursday." He hung up and told himself it was just business. Just the way things worked. He almost believed it. Wednesday morning broke cold and bright, and the VFW post in Branson looked like a rally staging ground. 37 bikes already lined the parking lot when Marcus arrived in Ironside's sidecar, and more were pulling in every few minutes, riders from Kansas City and Joplin, and places Marcus had never heard of, all wearing cuts from different clubs but moving with the same purpose. Commander Harold Gunny Reeves met them at the door. He was 72, built like a fire plug, with Korea and Vietnam ribbons on his vest and a handshake that could crush walnuts. "Dale Morrow," Gunny said. "Been a long time." 12 years. Ironside clasped the older man's hand with both of his. "Appreciate you opening the post." "For this? Hell, son, I'd have opened it if you'd called at midnight." Gunny's eyes moved to Marcus, assessing. "You're the one who found the papers." "Yes, sir." "Desert Storm?" "2 tours." Gunny nodded once, sharp and final. "Then your family. Come inside. We got coffee, we got maps, and we got about 6 hours to figure out how to keep a councilman from stealing what belongs to men like us." Inside, Dina had commandeered a table near the window and spread out a large-scale map of Riddler Springs. Red circles marked the county building, the tent camp, the roads in and out. Blue X's indicated staging points. She looked up when Marcus approached. "We've got confirmation from Linda Castro. She'll be at the meeting with her documentation. But she's nervous. Says someone's been following her car since Monday." "Puckett knows she's a threat," Ironside said. "He'll try to discredit her. Call her disgruntled, say she's got an axe to grind. That's why we need Marcus." Dina turned to him. "You're the one who found the original documents. You're a veteran. You're living on the land they're trying to steal. Your testimony ties it all together." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest. "I told you I'd be there." "Being there isn't enough. You need to speak. Publicly. On the record." She held his gaze. "Can you do that?" The question hung in the air. Marcus thought about standing at a podium, cameras pointed at him, the whole town watching while he admitted he'd been living in a tent for 2 years, while he admitted he'd lost everything, the house, the savings, the life Ellen and he had built together, while he admitted he hadn't been strong enough to hold it together after she died. He stopped, started again. "I'm not sure I can." Ironside stepped closer. "Nobody's asking you to be sure. We're asking you to show up anyway. It's not that simple." "Why not?" The words came out harder than Marcus intended. "Because I spent 30 years being someone, a soldier, a husband, a man who paid his bills and kept his promises, and now I'm..." He gestured vaguely at himself. I'm this, and if I stand up there and let the whole world see what I've become, I can't take that back. I can't pretend anymore. The room had gone quiet. Writers at other tables had stopped talking, watching. Ironside pulled something from inside his cut. The memorial jacket, Jacob's jacket, folded small but unmistakable. He set it on the table between them. You know why I carry this? Marcus didn't answer. Because my boy came home from Afghanistan broken, and I didn't see it. Or I saw it, and I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I told myself he just needed time. I told myself asking for help would make him feel weak. I told myself all kinds of things that let me off the hook. Ironside's voice cracked, just barely. And then he was gone, and I couldn't take any of it back. He touched the jacket's worn leather. I've got a grandson I haven't seen in 2 years, a daughter-in-law who stopped returning my calls because I couldn't face her after the funeral. I tell myself I'm giving them space, but the truth is I'm scared. Scared they blame me. Scared they're right to. He looked up at Marcus. Pride's a cage, brother, and the only one with the key is you. Marcus stared at the jacket, at the memorial patch stitched with love and grief. Jacob Morrow, 1987-2019. A son who never got the chance to ask for help. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out the dog tags he'd carried for 30 years. They were worn, smooth, the stamped letters nearly illegible. He set them on the table next to the jacket. My wife gave these back to me the day I came home from my second tour. Said she'd kept them under her pillow the whole time I was gone. Said they reminded her I was coming back. His throat tightened. After she died, I couldn't look at them, couldn't wear them, but I couldn't throw them away either, so I just carried them, like carrying her. He picked up the tags and closed his fist around them. All right, he said. I'll speak. By late afternoon, the count had reached 87 riders, with more expected overnight. The plan was set. Convoy would depart Branson at 7 a.m., arrive in Riddler Springs by 8:30, fill the parking lot and the streets around the county building before the 9 a.m. meeting. Peaceful, visible, impossible to ignore. Marcus returned to the camp to gather what little he had, the folder with his remaining documents, the photograph of Ellen, a change of clothes. The other tents were empty. The few men who'd been living there had scattered when word got around about the Thursday eviction. Only Marcus had stayed. He was packing his rucksack when the sheriff's cruiser pulled up the logging road. 2 deputies got out, hands on their belts. The sheriff himself stayed behind the wheel, engine running. Marcus Webb. The younger deputy's voice was professionally neutral. That's me. You're under arrest for criminal trespass. This is county property. You've been warned. Marcus didn't resist. There was no point. He let them cuff him, let them search his rucksack, let them put him in the back of the cruiser. Through the window, he watched one deputy flip through the manila folder, the documents, the maps, the evidence, and hand it to the sheriff. What do you want me to do with this? The deputy asked. Sheriff Frank Dawson glanced at the folder, then at Marcus in the rearview mirror. Log it as personal effects, he said. We'll sort it out after booking. They drove in silence to the county jail. Marcus was photographed, fingerprinted, processed. His belongings went into a paper bag, wallet, pocket knife, dog tags, Ellen's photograph. The folder went into a separate bin marked Evidence, Hold. The cell was small and cold. Marcus sat on the metal bench and stared at the concrete wall and thought about how close they'd been. 87 riders, Linda Castro's documentation, a plan that might actually have worked, and now he was locked up, his evidence in the hands of the same county that had committed the fraud, and the meeting was in less than 18 hours. At 9 p.m., a guard came to the cell door. Phone call, he said. You get one. Marcus followed him to a wall-mounted phone and dialed the only number he'd memorized, Ironside's prepaid. They got me, Marcus said when Ironside picked up. Trespassing charge. I'm in county lockup. A long pause. Then, the documents? Confiscated. Sheriff took them personally. Damn. Ironside's voice was tight. All right. We'll get you a lawyer. It won't matter. The meeting's at 9. Even if you get me out, the documents are gone. Linda's files won't be enough on their own. They'll say she fabricated them. There has to be something. There's one thing. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of what he was about to say. I mailed copies to my daughter, Rachel, in Little Rock. I haven't talked to her in 2 years, But she's got the originals I made at the library. Another pause. You got her number? Marcus recited it from memory. He'd never forgotten it, even when he'd stopped letting himself call. I'll reach out, Ironside said. But Marcus, she's going to know. About all of it. Where you've been, what happened. I know. You okay with that? Marcus thought about pride and cages and the keys only he could turn. No, he said, but I'm done hiding. He hung up and let the guard lead him back to his cell. Through the narrow window he could see a sliver of night sky, stars scattered like salt on black cloth. Somewhere out there, engines were gathering. Somewhere, a phone was ringing in Little Rock. Somewhere, a daughter he'd pushed away was about to learn the truth about her father. And in a few hours, one way or another, everything would change. Marcus pulled the thin blanket around his shoulders, lay down on the metal bench, and waited for morning. The cell door clanged open at 6:47 a.m. Marcus sat up, blinking against the fluorescent lights. A deputy he didn't recognize stood in the doorway, keys in hand. Webb, you're out. Someone posted bail. Who? The deputy shrugged. Some lawyer from Springfield. Said he was representing the VFW. You got friends in strange places. Marcus collected his belongings at the front desk. Wallet, pocket knife, dog tags, Ellen's photograph. The folder with his documents was not among them. Where's the rest of it? He asked the clerk. There was a manila folder. The clerk checked her records, frowning. Nothing here. Must still be in evidence processing. It's not evidence, it's personal papers. Take it up with the sheriff. She slid the property form across the counter. Sign here. Outside, the morning was cold and gray, the sky heavy with clouds that couldn't decide whether to rain or snow. A black pickup truck idled at the curb, and when the passenger door swung open, Marcus saw Gunny Reeves behind the wheel. Get in, Gunny said. We don't have much time. Marcus climbed in. The documents, gone. Sheriff says they were misplaced during processing. Convenient, huh? Gunny pulled away from the curb and headed toward Main Street. But that's not why you're smiling. Marcus wasn't aware he'd been smiling. I'm not. Your daughter's here. The words landed like a fist to the chest. Marcus turned to stare at Gunny, unable to speak. Ironside called her last night. She drove 4 hours in the dark, got into Riddler Springs around 3 a.m. Gunny's weathered face softened. She's got the documents, Marcus, the whole set, and she's madder than a wet hornet about what happened to you. She knows? About everything? She knows. Marcus looked out the window at the passing storefronts, the closed shops, the empty sidewalks of a town that didn't know its whole world was about to shift. His throat felt tight. How did she seem? Scared, angry, determined. Gunny glanced at him. Sounds like someone else I know. They turned onto Oak Street, and Marcus saw them. The bikes stretched for 3 blocks, parked in neat rows along both sides of the street, filling the county building parking lot, spilling onto the sidewalks and the grass of the town square. Chrome and leather and American flags, more than Marcus could count. Men and women in cuts from a dozen different clubs, standing in clusters, drinking coffee from paper cups, talking in low voices. How many? Marcus asked. Last count was 263, more coming in every few minutes. Word got out about your arrest. Gunny pulled the truck into an alley behind the hardware store. Veterans Day weekend. People were already planning memorial rides. Ironside just gave them a destination. They walked toward the county building through a corridor of riders who nodded at Marcus as he passed. Some reached out to clasp his shoulder. One woman with sergeant stripes pressed a cup of hot coffee into his hands and said, "Give him hell, brother." The building's front steps were crowded with townspeople, some curious, some concerned, a few holding signs that read, "Veterans deserve better and stop the land grab." A local news van had set up near the flagpole, a reporter speaking into a camera while her cameraman panned across the sea of motorcycles. Inside, the council chamber was standing room only. Marcus spotted Linda Castro in the front row, a thick binder clutched to her chest, her face pale but set. Dina and Coyote flanked her like bodyguards. Ironside stood near the door, and when he saw Marcus, he crossed the room in 3 strides. "She's in the back office," Ironside said quietly. "Wanted to see you before this starts." Marcus followed him down a side hallway to a small room marked "Staff Only." He pushed open the door and stopped. Rachel stood by the window, silhouetted against the gray morning light. She was 34 now, with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn jaw. The last time he'd seen her, she'd been standing in her own doorway, asking him one more time to stay, and he'd walked away rather than admit he needed help. She turned. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was holding the manila folder, the documents he'd mailed to her 2 years ago as a precaution, never expecting they'd matter. Dad. The word cracked something in him. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to make her understand why he'd pushed her away. Instead, what came out was, "You kept them." "Of course I kept them." She stepped closer, and he could see the anger beneath the exhaustion, the hurt beneath the anger. "I kept everything. Every letter you didn't answer, every voicemail you didn't return. I kept it all because I kept thinking—" Her voice broke. "I kept thinking eventually you'd come back." "Rachel? 2 years, Dad. I didn't know if you were alive or dead. I didn't know you were living in a tent in the woods while I was—" She pressed her hand to her mouth, steadying herself. "Why didn't you call me?" The truth was harder than any testimony he'd have to give today. "Because I was ashamed. Because I couldn't stand for you to see what I'd become. Because your mother—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "Your mother believed I could handle anything, and I couldn't handle losing her. I couldn't handle any of it. And I thought, if you saw that, you'd stop believing in me, too." Rachel stared at him for a long moment. Then she closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him. And Marcus held his daughter for the first time in 2 years and felt something loosen in his chest that had been locked tight since Ellen's funeral. "I never stopped believing in you," she said against his shoulder. "I was just waiting for you to believe in yourself again." A knock at the door. Ironside's voice. "They're starting." Rachel pulled back and wiped her eyes. She held up the folder. "Let's go show them who they're dealing with." The council chamber fell silent when Marcus walked to the public comment podium. He could feel 300 eyes on him, the council members at their raised table, the townspeople in the gallery, the reporters with their cameras, the bikers lining the walls. Councilman Ray Puckett sat at the far left of the council table, his face carefully blank, but Marcus could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed against the wood. Marcus adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. "My name is Marcus Webb. I served 2 tours in Desert Storm with the 82nd Airborne. I've been living in a tent on the land this council is voting to sell today." He paused, letting the murmur ripple through the crowd. 3 weeks ago, I found documents in a county dumpster. Documents that show this land that was earmarked for veteran transitional housing, was sold to a shell company called Bridgewater Holdings for 40 cents on the dollar. Documents that show Councilman Puckett's signature on the transfer authorization. Documents that show his brother-in-law is the registered agent for Bridgewater. Puckett leaned forward. "Mr. Chairman, this is highly irregular. This man is a trespasser. He was arrested last night for—" "I was arrested," Marcus said, "because I was inconvenient, because I knew things someone didn't want known, and my documents were confiscated and lost during processing." He held up the folder Rachel had given him. "But I made copies, and I mailed them to my daughter in Little Rock before anyone knew I had them." He handed the folder to the council chairman, who began leafing through the pages with widening eyes. "I also have corroborating testimony," Marcus continued. "Linda Castro, who works in the county clerk's office, has been documenting irregularities in land transfers for 18 months. She's here today with her own records. Date-stamped, notarized, impossible to dismiss as fabrication." Linda rose from her seat, clutching her binder. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I have copies for every council member, and I've already sent a set to the state attorney general's office. Whatever you decide today, this isn't going away." The chamber erupted. Council members conferred in urgent whispers. Reporters scrambled for better angles. The council chairman banged his gavel for order. Through it all, Marcus watched Puckett. The councilman's face had gone gray. He was staring at the documents in the chairman's hands, and Marcus could see the calculation happening, the weighing of options, the search for an exit that didn't exist. "Ray?" The chairman's voice cut through the noise. "You want to respond to these allegations?" Puckett stood slowly. He looked out at the crowd, the bikers, the townspeople, the cameras. He looked at Marcus, still standing at the podium, and something shifted in his expression, some final wall crumbling. "My father was a veteran," he said quietly. Korea. He's in a memory care facility now. Doesn't know who I am most days. He took a breath. I told myself this deal was just business. Told myself the housing project was never going to happen anyway, so what did it matter? Told myself a lot of things. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket and set them on the table. These are to my office. You'll find everything there. The real contracts, the financial arrangements, all of it. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I didn't do what I did. He looked at Marcus one last time. I'm sorry. That doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. He walked out of the chamber without looking back. 2 state troopers who'd been standing near the door followed him. The chairman cleared his throat. Given the circumstances, I move to table the vote on the land sale pending a full investigation. Do I have a second? Seconded, said 3 voices at once. All in favor? The vote was unanimous. Outside, the clouds had broken. Pale November sunlight fell across Main Street, catching the chrome of 263 motorcycles and turning them to silver. Marcus stood on the steps of the county building, with Rachel on one side and Ironside on the other, watching the crowd disperse. What happens now? Rachel asked. Investigation. Probably charges against Puckett. The land sale gets reversed, hopefully. Marcus shook his head. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. I have. Rachel turned to face him. You're coming home with me. To Little Rock. No arguments. Rachel. I said no arguments. Her jaw was set. Ellen's jaw. His jaw, stubborn as stone. You can help me with the shop. I bought a little bookstore last year. Could use someone who's read For Whom the Bell Tolls 11 times. Marcus looked at her, his daughter, who'd driven through the night to save him, who'd kept his documents and his letters and her faith in him when he'd given her every reason not to. He thought about pride and cages and the keys he'd finally learned to turn. Okay, he said. Ironside clapped him on the shoulder. Told you, pride's a cage. Yeah. Marcus pulled the dog tags from his pocket and looked at them, Ellen's touch worn into the metal, 30 years of carrying her with him. Then he lifted the chain over his head and settled the tags against his chest, where they belonged. But I think I finally found the key. 6 months later, spring had come to Little Rock, and Marcus Webb woke to birdsong instead of silence. He lay still for a moment, letting the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed register. The weight of blankets, the softness of a pillow, the pale morning light filtering through curtains Rachel had picked out herself. The room above the bookstore was small but warm, and the shelves along one wall held his few possessions. Ellen's photograph in a frame now, his discharge papers, the worn copy of For Whom the Bell Tolls that had survived 2 years in a tent. The dog tags hung from a hook by the mirror. He'd started wearing them again, most days. It felt right. Downstairs, he could hear Rachel moving around the shop, preparing for opening. The smell of fresh coffee drifted up through the floorboards. Marcus smiled, swung his legs over the side of the bed, and went to join her. The bookstore was called Second Chapter, Rachel's idea, though she swore she hadn't named it for him. It occupied a narrow storefront on a quiet street, the kind of place people wandered into by accident and left with armfuls of books they hadn't known they needed. Marcus had taken over the back room, sorting inventory and handling repairs on the old shelving units. His knee still ached in the mornings, but the work gave him purpose, and purpose made the ache easier to bear. Coffee's ready, Rachel said without looking up from the register. And you got mail. She slid an envelope across the counter. The return address was Riddler Springs, Missouri, the county clerk's office. Marcus opened it and read the single page inside, then read it again. The housing project, he said. They broke ground last week. Rachel looked up. The veteran transitional housing? The land sale was reversed in January. Federal grant came through in March. Gunny Reeves is on the oversight committee? Marcus set the letter down, something loosening in his chest. They're naming the first building after Ellen. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she came around the counter and hugged him, and they stood there in the morning light, holding on. The bell above the door chimed. A customer, a young woman with a toddler on. Her hip wandered toward the children's section. Rachel squeezed Marcus's arm and went to help her, leaving him alone with the letter and the weight of what it meant. Ellen would have laughed at the idea of a building with her name on it. She'd never wanted monuments. What she'd wanted was for people to take care of each other, to show up when it mattered, to remember that everyone was fighting battles nobody else could see. Maybe that was a kind of monument too. His phone buzzed. A text from Ironside. You see the news? Marcus hadn't. He pulled up the local Riddler Springs paper on his phone and found the article. Former Councilman Puckett, sentenced to 18 months community service. He read the details. Puckett had pleaded guilty to fraud and misuse of public funds. The judge had considered his cooperation, his lack of prior record, and, Marcus noted, testimony from several character witnesses, including the staff at Shady Pines Memory Care, where Puckett had continued visiting his father every Sunday throughout the trial. The sentence included mandatory community service at the VA hospital in Springfield. It wasn't justice, exactly. But it wasn't cruelty either. Puckett had made a choice when it counted, had stopped running and faced what he'd done. That had to mean something. Marcus typed back, "Saw it. You doing okay?" 3 dots appeared, then, "Better than okay. Went to see Maggie and Tyler last weekend." Marcus stared at the screen. Maggie was Jacob's widow. Tyler was Ironside's grandson, the one he hadn't seen in 2 years, the one he'd been too ashamed to face. "How'd it go?" Marcus asked. A long pause, then, "Hard. Good." "Tyler's got Jacob's eyes. Maggie cried. I cried. We're having dinner next month." Marcus could picture it, Ironside sitting in a living room he'd avoided for 2 years, looking at a boy who carried his dead son's face, finally letting himself grieve with the people who understood. "Pride's a cage," Ironside had said, "but cages could be opened." "Proud of you, brother," Marcus typed. "Learn from the best. Ride's coming up in November. You in?" Marcus smiled. The ride. The Ozark Iron Brotherhood had made it official. Every Veterans Day weekend, a convoy from Branson to Riddler Springs, ending at the site of the new housing project. Last year, 263 riders had shown up for a fight. This year, they'd show up to remember why the fight had mattered. "I'll be there," Marcus typed. "Rachel too, if she can close the shop." "Bring coffee. That gas station stuff is terrible." The bell chimed again. More customers, a couple browsing the history section. Marcus pocketed his phone and went to help them, moving through the narrow aisles with the easy familiarity of someone who'd found where he belonged. Later, after closing, he sat on the back steps with Rachel, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of copper and rose. She'd brought 2 mugs of coffee, and they drank in comfortable silence. "You ever think about what would have happened?" Rachel asked. "If you hadn't found that jacket?" Marcus considered the question. The jacket, Jacob's jacket, with the memorial patch that had sent Ironside looking for a stranger to thank. Such a small thing. A piece of leather in a ditch. A choice to walk 2 miles in the cold and return something that wasn't his to keep. "I try not to," he said, "but I think about what did happen, about all of it." "And?" He looked at his daughter, Ellen's eyes, his stubborn jaw, her own quiet strength that had carried her through 2 years of silence and 4 hours of dark highway when it mattered most. "And I'm grateful," he said, "for the people who showed up, for the ones who didn't give up on me, even when I'd given up on myself." Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. The evening was warm, the coffee was hot, and somewhere in Missouri, a building with Ellen's name was rising from land that had almost been stolen. Marcus Webb had spent 2 years learning how to disappear. Now he was learning something harder. How to stay. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales of unexpected kindness, and tell us in the comments, who showed up for you when you needed it most?